whatever we can pick up, if there are files around and if there are books around, if we've got evidence of what children have produced, if we've got lessons like PE, drama, dance, where that work might be less, particularly across year 7 to 9, less evidence over time. If we're looking for evidence of embedded routines, clear evidence of responses, etc. It's so important now to bear in mind the sort of totality, the beyond, if you want, rather than just the experience itself. The experience itself, of course, is very helpful in beginning to think about what lies behind the routines, the expectations, the faces, and the productivity. But I can honestly say that looking at the books and looking at the files, what you've got in front of you is a fair sample of what these children have produced in September. It's a fair sample. So if you're looking and thinking, gosh, there's not much here kind of thing, or wow, there's loads here, either way, it's a fair sample of what's behind the scenes. Any thoughts? Any thoughts in terms of just immediate reactions to what you've seen in the work, just in terms of attitudes to learning, first of all? Yeah? Anything that you're picking up there? You can't be wrong. I'll help you out if not, but anything that you're picking up in terms of attitudes? Yeah?
It's presented reasonably well.
I'm glad you said presented, and I'm glad you didn't use the word neat, because I'm not interested in it being neat, but I think the presentation is good, yeah? And what does that, why did you pick on that? Because, I'm with you all the way there. I think that's important. What's it telling you?
It could be evidence of redrafts or just care of the subject.
Yeah.
Finding the word.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if we want amending, if we want editing, if we want redrafting, that's great. If we don't need that's fine. But I couldn't agree with you more. It gives me a feel for, but I'll test it out when I see the individuals, that there's some care here, there's some pride here, because it looks as though they're going the extra mile to set out the work with some thought. Yep, I think so. But also it's looking at in terms of attitudes. Sorry?
It's very detailed.
There's a lot of detail. What is it? Why do you pick on that in terms of attitudes?
Lots of written work.
Yeah, one of the words that emerged in the summer from HMI, it's not a great word, but I've latched onto it because I think it's important it's productivity. Now, there's a danger, isn't there? Producing a lot doesn't necessarily mean we've got quality, but there's a lot. So again, in terms of perseverance, in terms of commitment, in terms of endeavour, we've got a lot here. And when you actually look at it closely, you're absolutely right, there's detail.
It's got ticks on it as well.
Sorry?
It's got ticks on it.
It's got ticks on it. It can't be bad if it's got ticks on it. It must be good. Anything else we're talking about? We've got care, we've got pride, presentation, we've got bulk, we've got detail. Yeah, okay. Anything else? Maybe some negatives, but let's see the positives at this moment in time. Yeah.
I feel like there's a high expectation of pupils from the teacher.
You think that's indicative of?
Yeah.
What we're seeing could well be. We could well be seeing, although of course we're not supposed to judge teaching, don't forget, can't judge teaching anymore, but you can't divorce, can you, output from teaching and attitudes from teaching. And certainly inspectors now do not judge teaching or grade it in visits to lessons anymore. We make a judgment, of course, by the totality of teaching overall in the school, but not by those snapshots. But I couldn't agree with you more. There does seem to be, if I can put it this way, an expectation of self here, and that must be generated by teaching, because children don't all have high expectations of self. But in terms of the bulk, in terms of the detail, in terms of the presentation, etc., I'm getting a feel for we've got children who are probably reasonably high expectations of themselves, yeah. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of what we're picking out of the work? Yeah.
I think the feedback's really effective. So it's setting out something that is very good about as a piece of work, but it's also giving them something to build on each time.
Do they build on it?
Well, there are responses here that have been taken into account. So on this one example, there is something that's been taken into account. You'd have to look at it over a period of time.
Sure. And we need to be careful here as well. I'm really pleased you mentioned feedback and response, because the world is getting obsessed with children's responses, and stationers the length and breadth of the country are making fortunes out of purple and green pens. And I say that tongue-in-cheek because it's really important that you continue to do it. Because what we want to install in children is a culture of not just being satisfied with first-time output. You know, I've done it, I've hashed it up, I've done it. Well, actually, it might not be good enough. You might not have committed enough thought to the process. I'm going to ask you to edit it. I'm going to ask you to think of a different language. I'm going to ask you to think of it from a different viewpoint and so forth. The only caveat, of course, the only danger is if it just becomes almost a set piece that every piece of work has to have feedback, which of course it doesn't, and you can't provide it anyway, you're too busy. And every piece of work, I'm not going to be satisfied with. You know, there's going to have to be some kind of a response, because that can breed children who think that, you know, the work's never going to be good enough kind of thing. There's always going to have to be something else and so forth. So it's really important that we don't get into over-routine and over-gimmick here, because it's such a strong exchange and dialogue that is emerging now in many schools, and it's certainly improving learners' thinking and deepening their thought processes. And I couldn't agree with you more. We've got evidence here. And I think looking at the books and looking at the files, I'd say there's still some missed opportunities and still some feedback where it's almost encouraging feedback, like, you know, you might consider doing this next time, rather than do it now, and I'll be checking up kind of thing. But undoubtedly, it's a strength that's developing, yeah. Anything else we can say here that's positive about attitudes to learning that's emerging from the work? Anything else that people have thought? Yeah.
I think there's a lot of evidence through the different pieces of work that pupils are being asked to think. There are higher order thinking skills that are visible in these pieces of work, which I also saw in the lesson, and I know we're not talking about the lesson yet.
We will.
Just reinforce really what I'm seeing here.
Yep. What kind of skills are you picking out there that you can see developing?
I think justification, having to justify their answers.
I've written that down. I've written that down in terms of opinion, view, different perspective, and saying mine. Yeah. Because I see, and I'm sure you see, ladies and gentlemen, lots of books with lots of productivity, and the danger is that it's just information. It's just note-taking. And actually there's not been much processing, there's not been much absorbing of the information, doing something with it at a lowish level so that it becomes meaningful to learners, and then beginning to do something with it at a higher level, so we're really getting under the skin. And I think there's a lot of evidence that I would agree with you there. Okay. Any negatives? Any negatives as we look through the work and we think, anybody sort of spotted anything there which would suggest that we've got some students here with negative attitudes or behaviours? Or would you be pretty pleased if this was your set of books kind of thing? Yeah? I'd be pretty pleased. I'd be pretty pleased. I'm with you. I've written all that kind of thing. I don't think there's much more here that I haven't written. In terms of, and of course there's a range, isn't there? I mean, there's talk about questionnaires here. If you go into the books, there's databases, there's network topologies, there's input-output devices. There's a range of, but I don't think the breadth sacrifices the depth, if you know what I mean. I think we've got a fair balance between breadth and depth. Yeah.
I think one thing that jumped out at me is that a lot of them has been they're working above the target. Which
do you know, I haven't even looked at that, I hadn't even noticed that, but well pointed out. Excellent, thank you. Right, good. And of course, the other thing that I don't know if you've got there, but I had in the books, were, and I'm not mad about stickers and you know, stamps. Sometimes you can't even see the writing for the stamps, you know. Feedback was given, we had some more, and it looks like a post office. But there are some interesting stickers in the books and the files about homework. And very often, you know that Ofsted's got a big thing about home learning, and certainly would appear there's a fair amount of home learning going on here, and I couldn't see the difference largely between the quality of the home learning and the school learning. In other words, again, that commitment seems to be going home as well. But well spotted about working above the targets. That's excellent, yeah. Okay. Right, anything about progress or achievement we want to say? Anything we want to add here now about progress? I mean, we're probably going over similar grounds, but let's push it a little bit further about progression, achievement. Anything that you're noticing here in terms of, we've talked about the detail, we've talked about the skills, we've talked a lot about the kind of things you might want to talk about in terms of progress. Can you see where learners are as they write, developing their thinking, reasoning out in written format, making connections, making links, beginning to think about cause and effect? Can you see that in the written work? Yeah, I think you can. Anybody else got anything else here? I mean, we'd love to look at it in detail, wouldn't we, in terms of the progression through a particular topic and moving on to a different topic, and whether it's progression across topics or progression within topics, and the progression, if you want, is discrete. But I certainly think it's progression in skills development and in terms of reasoning out, and certainly as the work goes through, and we see this in their books, children becoming more and more confident as they get towards the end of a topic in terms of owning it and being able to, as you rightly said, justify, assert, give reason, give opinion with confidence or with growing confidence. Anybody want to say anything else about the progress or the achievement? Yeah.
In the written word, they're clearly being taught how to plan, how to structure their thinking, and then put that into a writing frame, which is clear in most of the pieces.
I think that's a really good point. We talk about literacy across the curriculum, don't we? And there is a real sequencing here of ideas, isn't there? And there is a good use of complex sentences and paragraphing to develop an idea or a thought process and then move on to something else. So it's a fairly structured approach, isn't it, in terms of the writing, which again shows the maturity in terms of achievement. Yeah, okay. Right, so that's really useful. That's one of my evidence for, as I go into the lesson. I probably, if I couldn't talk to the children. Desperately wanted to talk to the children in this session. It wouldn't have been, like we used to do years ago, what are you doing? They should know what they're doing, but I'd really want to know, how is this really helping you too? Where are you going next with this, do you think, and so forth? Is this really challenging you? Are you really feeling stretched by, and so forth? But I couldn't do it because it was too, they were too much together. There wasn't that opportunity really for me to get in amongst them there. But I'd certainly spend a good 10-15 minutes if I could, either talking to children or looking at work, conscious of what's sort of going on around me, but not making a beeline initially for what's going on around me, to get this really important three-dimensional perspective of learning over time. Okay, let's talk about the scenario. We won't go through the phases in the learning per se. We've done that before. Needless to say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I've got about 9 sort of episodes here. If we just refresh our memories, and then maybe we can think about attitudes and float that impression that we've got of their work over and see if it sits with attitudes here, and then float that concept of progression and see if it sits with what we've seen here, yeah? Rather than go laboriously through every stage like we've done before, because that's not what we do these days. But let's just refresh our memory about the episodes. Remember, the children come in, they have to think immediately about digital divide, what it means to them, and write something down in silence. They've then got some scenarios on little strips. They have a look at the scenario. The question is, how has technology impacted on your life? Because that's the scenario. And they're invited to talk and exchange. bit of question and answer work there, asking them to, you know, justify their responses. This notion of how then, why is there a different impact on different people in different scenarios? This digital divide, what does it mean for you? Bit of whole class Q&A. Then they go into their books and write a definition of digital divide. And then if you recall, we have the 6 sets of true or false, and they have to justify their responses. And then they take the whole of the 6 true or falses and begin to tease out between themselves about whether they were surprised about any, was it what they expected the outcome, any additionality there. And then finally, they've got to think about, so what's the root cause? What are they piecing together as the root cause of digital divide with the cards, put them in order. Don't know if you saw it, but 2 or 3 early finishers got an additional card which threw them into a bit of confusion because all of a sudden they'd got 5 cards and they had to make some different choices and release one of them. So that was the episode, that was the experience that we saw. What were you thinking, ladies and gentlemen, about the attitudes to learning? Were you seeing similar attitudes as you saw through the work? Were you seeing different attitudes? And were they positive? Were they negative? Where are we coming from along that line? Over to you. What kind of things were you seeing that you could actually, let's go with the positives that you could actually take from the work and float immediately onto the experience. And then we'll see if anybody's got anything that they're struggling with that they just didn't quite see. Or perhaps they saw something different here that they didn't see in the work. Yeah?
There's clear high expectations like there is in the written work.
Of the children of themselves. Can you think about any of the episodes there where you evidence that? Yeah?
So, for example, when the teacher's drawing out their prior knowledge,
yes. Right at the beginning.
They're accountable for pulling out that information through the questioning.
We have 15 children. Did you feel they were all thinking about that and contributing?
And there's peer collaboration, that the learning's sort of being shared between all of them. Okay. I mean, remember, we're favouring no one approach here. We're not going to say it would have been better had she done. We're just looking at the outcomes here. Certainly they were asked to think right from the word go. There was a fair amount of thinking needed throughout the various sessions. And I think I would agree with you. There was generally, I couldn't see any sluggish responses. Oh, I don't really, you know, there seemed to be that routine, that expectation of self, and that desire to want to be involved. Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah. Any other things that you're picking up from the work that you're seeing in the episodes here in terms of attitudes? Yeah.
I thought that the way that Ria wasn't let off the hook when she was asked a question she didn't know she was given time to think of it passed back. I like that. I've never seen that and I've never used it. So that, and I can see that responsibility, taking responsibility, carrying through the work.
It's a really interesting point. I thought the girl over here was struggling at one point when she said, she put her hand up and she said, oh, I can't remember now, etc. And she wasn't let off the hook and I thought it's all going to go flat here. But she came back. She was resilient enough. Yeah. And I couldn't agree with you more, where learners were put on the spot, because they were fairly put on the spot, some of them, come back to that in a moment, and where they were asked a follow-up question or given an opportunity to choose another peer for a response, people stuck at it, didn't they?
Yeah, they weren't let off the hook.
They weren't let off the hook, and neither did they riddle. They were resilient enough to think on their feet or search a bit deeper. And I think that's what we see through the work as well. Yeah, I'd agree. Any other, attributes, competencies, qualities that you're picking up through the work in terms of attitudes that you think you saw in the episodes here? Yeah.
So I was just thinking about the language that the students use to
that's interesting. Excellent. Go on.
That the way that they articulate their responses matches the language that's used in their written work.
That's really perceptive. I couldn't agree with you more. We didn't talk about the language, but I think the language in the written word some of the specialist language, just some of the words they use, the vocabulary, the idiom that they choose to express, it's pretty mature. It's pretty mature. I thought their spoken language, by and large, was pretty mature. You know, they explain, they justify, they ascertain. There wasn't an awful lot of pair work to contradict, etc. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's that maturity, there's that sophistication coming through here as well. Yeah, you're not thinking we've got the wrong class with the wrong work. I hope. I'm thinking we've got the right class with the right work here. Yeah. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen?
There was quite a bit of confidence when they were choosing true or false, and they weren't swayed by other people. They stuck to their guns quite a lot.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I agree with you. I think they are a confident group, and I think we've seen confident writers. I think we've got confident writers. Yeah, come back to that perhaps in a few minutes. Yeah. Anything that you didn't see, that you picked up through the work, and you were disappointed that you didn't see here. Or anything that you saw here and you thought, ooh, I've not really seen that through the written work. Let's take the latter first. Is there anything that you saw here that you didn't see emerging through the written work? Right. There's nothing on my mind really, but there is something on my mind in a way that I've seen through the written work that I didn't really see as much of in the scenario. Hello.
As to the target group.
Yeah, I mean, there was no mention of target grades, etc. You don't need to mention target grades anymore. Those are the days where, you know, every lesson had to have a target and people had to be reminded of it and what the difference was between X and Y and Z and B. Gone are those days, thank goodness. There wasn't any, and it is in the writing, you're absolutely right. But it's not the be all and end all, but well spotted. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah?
Am I right in saying that they were always pushed for justification, was never forthcoming straight away?
I'm sort of semi on the same wavelength as you here. I don't know if you ever heard the gentleman, but there was sort of push for justification. It wasn't sort of necessarily forthcoming. Anybody want to go any further there, or it's not so much the justification, but for me, but I just thought there was. Hello.
There's a lot of extended writing in here.
Yes.
And there wasn't any extended writing.
There wasn't.
But
No, they only wrote a sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't tell you.
No. No, it doesn't. You're absolutely right. So I'm not bothered there wasn't loads of extended writing, but you're leading, you're getting into my thought processes here. Yeah? Yeah.
On the whole, the work presented with opportunities to draw conclusions or evaluate.
Yes.
So, I suppose at one level it was lower order, or lower order than it could have been. An opportunity to actually push that thinking further.
Okay, okay, I won't make a comment. Anybody else want to say anything? Just in terms of what we're picking up through the written work, and particularly think about the progression, and possibly the scenario. Yeah, yeah, right, okay.
I'm sort of picking up from the comments at the beginning, which was we didn't have opportunity to speak to the children.
Yeah.
And it was very well orchestrated by the teacher.
Very well.
But that letting go scenario where they were just sent off to work independently or interdependently.
Do children have to work independently?
They don't, and they were thinking independently, but I think they do need to process ideas for themselves in their own.
And you didn't see as much processing of ideas for themselves as you've seen in the written work? Okay. I mean, could just be at a different point of the learning process, etc., etc., but I take the point there. There was another comment, hand going up.
I really agree with what you just said. I felt like that would have been the first 25 minutes maybe leading into something like we can see in here, if that makes sense. They kind of would bounce around the ideas and they would have come up with their own stuff in here. So in 25 minutes, I think, I had a lot to do.
Yes.
To build into something like this.
Okay. Okay. I personally, having seen the written work and seeing the fluency and seeing the confidence and seeing the detail and seeing the depth, I just thought, in a way, they were a little overled in this experience. I'm not for one moment advocating a specific style or not. I'm not saying we don't use cards, I'm not saying don't do this or don't do. But at the back of my mind here, I think they are a very alert and interested group. We've got the alertness, we've got the interest, and we've got the commitment that we're seeing in the written work. I'm not so sure that the particular session here, for me, challenged them necessarily as much as what I'm seeing through the written work. I'm wondering, for example, if we needed all the various steps to get them really thinking about digital divide, different viewpoints, different perspectives, different cultures, different communities, whether we needed all that, and whether there was sufficient time for them to get a real feel for Africa, this particular perspective, this particular, community, the aged, the disabled, and so forth. And whether or not, with clearly what's emerging over time, we couldn't have released them, we couldn't have let them go sooner to get really stuck in for themselves, because I just think in their written work, all those skills and qualities and confidence and fluency is in abundance. So in a way, I think that was a really well-planned scenario. I think some of the resources and experiences were very appropriate for learners. Whether we're entirely appropriate for what is a confident, mature group, even though they're at the beginning of considering, because there certainly were a digital divide, and they've certainly made progress, haven't they? Because they've gone out knowing full well. I didn't need to see them write it down at the end. That's why we stopped. I didn't need to see them write it down. I could tell through the talk that they've got a really, they've processed, they've absorbed. But I guess what I'm saying is, picking up what I'm seeing in the written work, could we have processed, could we have absorbed a little bit more, I'm going to say independently, sooner, quicker, and developed in a way their own depth, rather than being led through, which might have been an appropriate, for example, approach with a lower attaining group. That's what's going through my mind. So in terms of attitudes to learning, I don't think that any of them have not done what was expected of them, and they've tried to give more. Sometimes I just felt that the timing of the activities, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, etc., just sort of capped that enthusiasm, that real, desire, that real flow that we've seen in the written word. But in terms of attitudes to learning, because I'm going to grade this because I'm going to put a grade down on my form here. I'm not just grading the attitudes I've seen here that I think are slightly capped, but I'm grading the attitudes in the work as well. And I'm asking you what grade you would give. And we'll start off with a 2, because it's certainly no lower, is it? These attitudes to learning are most certainly good. Are we seeing better attitudes over time than we've actually seen in the experience? What do you think? Yeah.
I was going to say, she gave lots of time for peer collaboration, which helped to build their confidence.
Right.
And she also
do you think so?
She gave them time to think, so that when they came up with their answers...
You see, I want to agree with you. Yes, I didn't think they had enough time. I thought they were very, very controlled. There was an opportunity to talk from time to time, but I wasn't sure they had enough to talk about, really. I was looking for more detailed conversation, but there wasn't enough for them to talk about to engender that. I know what you mean, but I just wonder to what extent that talk was really self-challenging, and to what extent they got the opportunity to challenge one another. They were making decisions, they were making some choices, but fairly compartmentalised. But I'm asking you about where we're going with this. Are we sticking at good, or are we saying that actually the learners' attitudes here are better than good when we piece everything together? What are you thinking? Yeah?
I think of the assessment of work, I was really impressed.
I
said here, I would be delighted for my child to be taught.
I was. And in my mind, I put the one down. I think we've got, and that's got to be indicative of challenging, stretching, really, high expectations over time, hasn't it, of teaching. It's only personal, but I just don't feel that in this scenario we got to those limits, we got to those heights. That's my personal opinion, and that's the feedback I'd be giving to the teacher. I'd be saying I think what we're seeing over time is really developing, as we've said. Not too sure whether in this scenario, even going to the beginning of the topic, that he did that. But that's my opinion. Yeah.
But you don't know, because you didn't see their written feedback.
I don't need to see.
And
you don't need to see the written feedback.
There was an extension activity which could have shown you that.
No. We could have stayed an hour. We could have stayed 2 lessons. I'm looking at what we saw in the 35 minutes and whether that was a productive use of time, given learners' skills, attitudes, and the frame of mind they're quite clearly in over time. I don't think it was. That's my personal opinion. But I don't need to see more. And I certainly don't need to see the written outcomes, because I've seen the thought processes and I've heard the conversations. What about the progress, ladies and gentlemen? Progress achievement. Over time in the lesson, where are you coming from on this one? It's not inadequate, it most certainly isn't. Have we seen enough as a piece altogether to say this is outstanding progress and achievement? Or are we saying that it's at least good? And given the fact that what we're seeing in written form, gosh, even though we might not, and I'm certainly not as enamoured by what I've seen in the 25 minutes compared with over time, but this is just one experience, and it's my personal viewpoint, based on what I've seen and what learners have produced. What would we say there? Would we say that, I don't think we'd be saying progress and achievement requires improvement, would we? Would we be saying then a 2? Or would we be going for a 1? Or does it matter? Does it matter? Yeah.
Why are we grading it at all? Is it as if this is the only lesson we've seen?
No, I'm not grading the lesson.
Hang on, sorry.
No, I'm not grading the lesson. I'm grading progress and achievement per se, as we see through the work and as we see through the experience. But if there's one thing that's going to dominate my thoughts, it's going to be the progress and achievement through the work, because that's obviously what's going on all the time. But of course, if I was in a PE lesson, I'd be looking at attitudes, I'd be looking at sequences, routines, I'd be looking at responses, because I may not have an awful lot of work to look at all the time, depending on what the experience and those research. But I certainly aren't basing my judgments about the progress that learners are making just on this 25-30 minutes. But I'm making a judgment because it's important that we judge the progress and the achievement that learners make in schools. Yeah?
I think I would have to sound balanced. I'm just thinking while you're talking there. That the overall I'd come out on a 1 because I would say the negatives that you highlighted from what you've seen were at worst disproved by the written work. Therefore, I would have to say a balanced view, I would say.
So you're thinking that over time, yeah, this is pretty damn good stuff for a year 10 group.
Yeah, because I think my attitude would be the same as that lady's, that if my kid was in that class, I do things.
Yeah.
But that's not really
No, that's a really good response. Anybody agree with that? Anybody in the same camp there? Or anybody thinking that because of what we've seen, it's sort of slightly tarnished what we're thinking about in terms of that really positive start, because these are all the things now that we've got to bear in mind.
So, looking at the work, I was thinking that I would need to see more from individual students to be able to actually see the progress there. Because if this is only one double-page spread from each book, I think there's only probably one.
It's to whet your appetite here, isn't it? Quite clearly,
Yeah. So it might be that all of these kids started at the start of this year on a really high level already, and that actually they've just carried on.
And certainly, if you were in a school, you'd be, and even we might have some more data. We might have the books, we've got the files. Yeah, you'd want to probably see a little bit more. And that was just to give you a feel for, so we could have the discussion about attitudes and progress and achievement through work. And it suffices to do that. But I couldn't agree with you more. You probably need to see a bit more. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 2 or 3 responses, and then we'll roll it together. Yeah.
I think that I actually disagree with you, the fact it was capped, because the different stages, you counted 9, were increasing challenge, looking at the causes, looking at the effects, and developing that thinking that could then go into the next 25 minutes and write an extended piece of work. So she you did lead. She did lead them, but she led them in a way that would create the basis of a deep piece of writing, a detailed piece of writing.
I think what I would say is I'd question whether they need that lead, whether they could got there, even without the lead. Okay? Back to the progress over time, judgments, etc. Yeah, 1, 2, you had your hand up, and then we'll have the 2 ladies, and then we'll close it. Yeah.
I do feel that in their books they're getting more into the depth of learning.
Yes. And remember, this is just 25 minutes.
Yeah,
or 30
exactly.
minutes. Yeah.
So I think that we're getting to the depth of the learning towards the end of that lesson.
Okay.
And so I would probably say that over time you'll see this is a 1 because they've got depth of learning over a period of time.
Okay. I mean, certainly there was progress through this, the 30 minutes. Whether there was enough depth, I'm coming back to that in my view, I don't think there was, so I thought there could be more, but I take the point there, yeah? And there was 2 comments.
I don't know, I just felt it was consistently independent learning. She
This
wasn't guide all of it as well. It's consistently the students' response to things and how they feel about it. So it is consistently, I feel, there and here, independent thoughts and feelings. She's never kind of disagreed or, she's always given that approach to kind
just comes back to whether or not those feelings are deep enough, etc. And we differ here. But thank you for your point. That consistency in terms of breadth, depth, immersion. Yeah, and the final point. Thank you.
I just think that it's very much average, as in everybody has met their objectives, but nobody. So that's the bare minimum. Everyone's achieved
Here.
It's both, because even in the work, where there's a comment of you could do this or you could approach this, there's no expectation. It's the action. It's not that kind of have a look at this to improve. It's not written anywhere.
And
So
there is certainly scope to respond further with some of the comments that don't necessarily merge. I don't know if you've seen them there, but certainly when you see more of the work, there's scope for more there indeed. But I, as you've heard, I mean, I'm not so sure we've seen them challenged enough here, and they've just been able to self-challenge enough. But overall, I'm coming away thinking there's a lot of skills development, a lot of depth going on in this part of the school's work. I'd be judging progress and achievements and attitudes to learning both probably as a one. Certainly attitudes to learning, and I'm on the borderline with 2 or more, but if I looked at the books a little bit more detail, I'd probably go for 1. And that's interesting, you see, because in the old days, I'll be honest, I would not have judged that experience as 1. And that's where I think we've moved on. And that's good, and we're evolving as schools, because we shouldn't be judging experiences that are short and, a snapshot in time. We have been there, and Ofsted has led that, and we've moved on, thank goodness. But we should be trying to see that bigger picture and taking into consideration all of these other dimensions. And there are times this year where I've been in a similar scenario where I didn't feel the experience, mirrored exactly the impact that it was undoubtedly having day in, day out over time. And there have also been very other interesting experiences since September where the experience was, or appeared to be, really powerful, but that led to a conversation because it wasn't captured over time. And the most important thing is I think that this new approach is leading to fewer and fewer teachers just listening for numbers and more dialogue about pedagogy and strengths in learning experiences and just consideration of areas for development as we've considered tonight. So on behalf of Tyre Hill, can you put your hands together and thank our teachers?